So, welcome everyone to our Young Fabian Zoom chat. We've been doing these every kind of weekday of what's going on. And tonight we're joined by Julie Ward, former MEP for the Northwest. So, Julie, would you like to give a quick intro about you and I guess how you became an MEP and why?
Okay. Well, I worked in the arts and youth sector before I was in politics. I ran an artists cooperative that was working with marginalised communities, not just with young people, but with all kinds of people who were on the margins of society. That organisation was actually based in a ex-coalfield community in County Durham, but I had also worked running a regional arts and disability organisation. I'd also worked at Contact Theatre in Manchester, doing outreach work with 15 to 25-year-olds. I'd also run festivals, fringe festivals in Coventry and in Nottingham. So my whole life was really about informal education, if you like, culture, youth connections, grassroots kind of making it, doing it yourself kind of stuff. And some of the projects that I started to do were European projects and international projects. So, for example, my organisation was the British partner for a peace school in Germany that young people used to attend for 2 weeks every summer from all across the EU, but even from beyond that, we had young people there from Ukraine, from Russia, from Israel, from Palestine. And the idea was to explore European values, European themes together. It's a complete fallacy that everybody speaks English. So these young people would use their creativity and art skills, their different kind of cultural interactions, to exchange ideas with each other, to get to know one another. I mean, this is all, you know, intercultural learning, dialogue kind of stuff, but it really builds an enormous sense of self-confidence in the participants. So I was taking these communities of young people from this marginalized community to participate in these projects, and they were completely transformed by their experiences. And this peace school was funded by Youth in Action, which was a precursor to what is now the Erasmus Plus project. So because Erasmus was always this, you know, students going to learn in different universities all around Europe. But the plus bit is all the extra wonderful stuff that's really about inclusion of marginalized communities, all the kind of add-on extra value stuff, like educators learning from each other, and in fact, that program has been made broader and more inclusive in the past 5 years. So my experience of Europe was that it was being with these young people in these incredible transformational spaces. And because I was working with those young people both before and after the experiences, I could see the difference in them, and it really was amazing. So, for example, I work with a lot of the really naughty kids, so you know, we take them away, and like before they went away with us, they would be, you know, they were dropping out of school, they were getting into trouble with the police, you know, they might be doing stuff with substance abuse or whatever. You know, they wouldn't be interested in trying to look for a job, for example, or you know, a range of behaviors, I suppose, partly because of the terrible poverty that they were living in, you know, an area of huge multiple deprivation that had really been completely forgotten about ever since the coal mines closed. I first moved there in 1984, so I lived through all that post-Thatcher devastation. but it was just amazing to see the transformation of these young people. And I just want to give some examples. So some of them came back and went to university. They came back, they found jobs, they set up their own businesses, they became leaders in the organization that I was running. They became involved in participatory democracy experiments. They got themselves elected into local youth councils. They became volunteers. And so for me, this was a fantastic example of, Europe really making a difference to the lives of young people. And I've always believed that Europe is a peace project. And so this place where we used to go was set up after the Second World War as a reparation that the Germans made for the things that the Nazis did. So for me, that is the beginning of my European journey. I was getting very worried about the anti-European rhetoric in the right-wing press, in the Daily Mail, in the Sun, in the Telegraph. And it wasn't my experience of Europe. And I realized that Europe was under threat and that it needed people to defend it. And I felt that I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted to defend the Europe that I believe is possible. And that really drove me to put my name down as a potential candidate in the 2014 selection process for Labour.
Wow. So I guess one of the follow-up questions from that is, you talked so much about how Europe really helped those kids you used to work with, those naughty kids. And now we've left the European Union, but the future relationship itself is so much in question. How do you think future kind of generations of young kids are going to be able to kind of maintain those links with Europe if we can't take part in Erasmus Plus, for example? What do you think?
Well, hopefully we have to fight for everything now, all right? We can't give up. We do have to fight for the things that your generation wants, Hollie. And I know that you're very pro-European. And I know that, that most of the young Fabians that I know and people that are phoning in will feel this sense of internationalism, but starting with our nearest neighbours, for example. It doesn't begin and end with the borders of Europe, I have to say. But we will have to fight for all of these things going forwards. We do know that young people who could vote, who were, given the vote in the referendum, were massively pro-European, pro-Remain. And I don't think that generation is suddenly going to, be anti-European. I think that, I feel the pain of all of, for everybody for whom Brexit is it's a difficult thing to come to terms with. So I believe we've got to really, really fight for participation in all these programs. I know that our European partners want us to be partners. So the issue isn't Europe, the issue will be our government. And
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. But everything, it's a fight. That's why I say I think what I learned in politics is that everything is a fight. And it's a bit like we didn't know what we were going to lose until we lost it, did we? And so I think that we just have to continue to be very, very pro-European. And we know that right across the UK, there are so many grassroots pro-EU groups that got set up. They're strengthening, they're not weakening. And we've also seen how the Conservatives have suddenly realised that some of the things that they were saying, they're actually going to have to bite their lip. So, for example, they've suddenly realised, in fact, that we need all these doctors and nurses who are EU 27 citizens, that we need these people with apparent low skills, who have been going home because they couldn't get settled status here. And I think there will be the particular circumstances that we find ourselves in now are going to call for greater cooperation, not less. So it feels a bit like everything's going to be on the back burner for a while, but that doesn't mean that we bury our pro-European values. It doesn't mean that we forget the battle that we fought in the lead up to to Brexit at the end of January. And I know many people who are who have made plans already for a whole range of different activities, which some of which won't be able to happen in, you know, in groups, in public spaces, but will happen online. The first of those will probably be May the 9th, which is Europe Day. And I think there'll be many anniversaries of that kind where there will be events. And I hope that young people and that young Fabians participate in those events, because, you know, what we are discovering now is that we need solidarity. We need solidarity between generations. We need solidarity between communities. We need to put all our divisions to one side in order to fight this enemy that we cannot see. And I think that that is true European values, and that we'll be able to demonstrate that and to make these alliances with our European comrades, with our sisters and brothers, and all the alliances that we've got, you know, in our socialist family, that we'll be able to make those even stronger afterwards. But we never got anything by being quiet and standing on the sidelines. So, you know, let's just be ready to be vocal and to be very visible and to make demands.
Absolutely. And, you know, as the international officer, I can say the young Fabians are going to be there every step of the way on this pro-European fight. And, you know, we can't let that go. So to play devil's advocate for a second, something I've seen a lot of kind of right-wing commentators on Twitter saying is we can see kind of Schengen closing down at the moment and borders closing off as Europe is really the worst hit by what we're seeing at the moment. What would you say to those kind of people who say, well, this just shows the nation state is more important and Europe is a failed project?
There's no doubt that what is happening is challenging for every nation state, and also challenging for geopolitical organizations. However, I fear that some of the worst results and impacts of the coronavirus pandemic are going to be felt in the United States of America, which is, yes, it's a large country of federated states, but it's not working closely with other partners. It's, you know, the America First agenda, which Trump started, you know, and then in fact our populist politicians kind of took that up. That doesn't play out well when you need to pool resources, when you need to share information about how to beat this. What we've seen is that this virus doesn't respect borders. And in the same way that climate change doesn't respect borders, yeah, or other, you know, forms of criminal activity, trafficking, for example, and so we have to transcend any borders that that our governments might put up, and I think this digital online space is one of the ways in which we're beginning to transcend those borders already. The UK, the British government, has already shown itself to be out of line, really, out of line with the multilateral organizations that we should be working with. So not listening to the World Health Organization, for example, yeah? So this kind of exceptionalism that we have in this country, and I believe it's English exceptionalism rather than British exceptionalism, we're already seeing how that has resulted in us not joining forces with our European partners on this kind of, there was an agency that was set up to look at planning for pandemics and sharing information, best practice. And I think we will rue the day that we decided not to be part of that. Also, the EU is participating in joint procurement, which means getting personal protective equipment in massive bulk orders at the best possible rate, and getting rid of red tape and bureaucracy in order for countries to be able to access that equipment very, very quickly. And apparently we're not part of that. So there, I think that being on an island, you know, we have a natural border in that we're surrounded by sea, and I think that's in many ways that has been a metaphor for our slightly arm's length relationship with Europe, hasn't it? We've always had to cross a body of water, either by air or under the sea or riding the waves. And I think that that's, in a way, the fact that we haven't had those land borders has made it slightly easier for us to remain at arm's length. But I think what we'll discover is that being an island is actually very lonely, and you know, there's a danger of just turning in on ourselves rather than reaching out. I also feel that we need to be generous in spirit. And one of the things that I really hated about the referendum campaign, and also about the discussion about the Brexit deal, it was always about what can we get. It was never about what can we give. It was never about us being generous. It was never about what can we do together. How can we share knowledge and solve problems together? And of course, that's what the EU was set up to do. But I think we have to inspire the best in our citizens to want to continue to reach out to communities that have been the hardest hit by this pandemic. We're going to be hard hit for sure, but already we're seeing terrible crises in Spain and Italy, and many people living in the United Kingdom will have friends and family, loved ones, you know, business colleagues, students, they'll have friends that they studied with, they'll remember places that they were traveling to on holiday, and these will be places now that will be absolutely devastated by this virus. And I think that even though this is the most horrendous situation that any of us have lived through, I think, I mean, those people who remember the war will remember an awful time. But I know, from my perspective, this is really a frightening, unnerving time to be alive. But I also think that it gives us an opportunity to rebuild afresh and new, and to try and find the best in everybody, and to encourage that. And so I think that means reaching out, not, you know, turning our backs to the wall. And it doesn't mean looking just across the Atlantic at our American cousins and friends. It also means being very outgoing and open to our nearest neighbours in Europe.
So to move from one crisis to another, we also have a climate crisis that people seem to have forgotten a little bit about at the moment, with everyone obviously being told drive more, don't use public transport, kind of everything counterproductive to what we've been arguing for to save the planet for the past few years. And we know that one country cannot solve the climate crisis alone. And also young people are going to be the ones who really live through the effects of it when it comes. So how do you think that we as young Brits can work with other young Europeans and kind of at least try and push this onto the agenda more and get our nations to cooperate a bit more?
Well, young people are taking a lead, aren't they? I mean, Greta Thunberg demonstrates, you know, she's I mean, she's an adolescent. She's not even at university or college. She's what, 12, 13 years old now? She's very young. Well, when she started this, she was very young. I mean, we forget she's been an incredible campaigner for the past couple of years. But I think that what young people can do is demonstrate honesty, actually. And, you know, that's what she did. She just stood up and she said it out loud, you know, the things that needed to be said. And I think that's the role that young people have to be playing now, is to demand that honesty and transparency, and truly a place at the table where things are being discussed. She carved out a space that didn't exist for young people, and we've got to make sure that her legacy continues. You know, lots of things are kind of being put to one side at the minute, but what will have been demonstrated by the staying in their communities and stopping traveling and working from home and building things together using, you know, new communication tools, new sharing tools. I think what we will demonstrate actually is that we don't have to be traveling on jet planes so much, and that the digital online space can be almost as good as being in the same room as somebody. And I'd just like to refer to something I heard on BBC Radio 6 this morning. So it's become my it's become my kind of saving grace, just listening to the amazing music on BBC Radio 6. And Lauren Laverne was talking this morning about how a neurologist had done a little bit of research into our experiences of seeing people's faces. And apparently, seeing people in this context, like Zoom or FaceTime or Skype, is almost as beneficial to people's well-being, to the enzymes and the positive and the things that are coursing through our body that make us feel good. So there's a science behind this. This screen face-to-face contact is almost as good as being in the actual same room as somebody. And that is an interesting piece of research, isn't it? Because we always have this thing that we had to like go down the pub together, or to be in, you know, in a big space together. And we're learning actually that with this extraordinary technology that we already had, that we were underusing, that we can continue actually to make this one of our really strong campaigning tools from now on. The other thing I suppose that we've seen is that our satellite pictures have shown us already how the lack of air flights has made clear skies above the places where the lockdown started to happen immediately. And so I think that we're also discovering the world around us a bit. We've been on a treadmill, haven't we? And I think young people have been on that treadmill perhaps more so than others, you know, like focused on exams, on targets, on, you know, doing this, ticking that box, achieving. And actually now might be the time for everybody to be looking outside a bit more, seeing this incredible world that we all live in. And I think that's what Greta Thunberg was really trying to demonstrate to people, that we have an extraordinary responsibility, not just to other people on the world, but to all life on this planet. And again, I think young people feel that innately when they're very, very young. Maybe they forget about it a bit when they think that, you know, they've got to get the latest trainers or the latest, you know, the latest gadgets or whatever. But actually, that just engaging, just being, just that playfulness about being young, which is about being open and spontaneous, is something that all of us need to be reminded about. And so I think that, you know, and I've been with you guys, Hollie, you know, because Hollie, we were together at the Young European Socialist summer camp. And
yes.
well, I'm not young, you know, like I have my 63rd birthday recently, but I know how energized I am as a campaigner, and as somebody on the front line fighting for people, when I spend time with younger people who remind me of the really important things about, you know, having fun, being open, being generous, you know, and that kind of friendliness. And I think sometimes as we grow older, we forget about that. So let's relearn all that again. And you keep reminding us actually about that.
Thank you. So I am going to open this up now. If any of you want to ask a question or make a comment or just kind of get a discussion going, feel free. I've allowed you to unmute yourselves. So
thank you.
Okay, so Ibrahim.
Yes. Hi. Thank you ever so much, first of all, to Julie for inviting me to this Zoom. I got the message and I thought, young Fabian. So I said, Julie, she's sending me all these messages. I don't even know some of these groups. I said, but I have to go because she's going to point me in the right direction. So I said, okay, I will attend this meeting. Well, my name is Ibrahim. I'm originally from Sierra Leone in West Africa. I've lived in the United Kingdom now since 2000 when I came over. I was 10 years of age when I went through the 10 years of civil war in Sierra Leone. And that lasted for about 10 years. And then in 2014, whilst of course living in the UK, the Ebola outbreak happened, which started first of all from Guinea, Conakry in West Africa, and then moved into Liberia, Monrovia, and then Sierra Leone is sort of right in the middle on the equator of it. So Sierra Leone also, of course, got the Ebola. So I was asked by a couple of my friends to go actually and work and help support in terms of the Ebola outbreak, in terms of, first of all, finding the disease, getting to understand what is happening on the ground. And then we worked there until post-Ebola. I came back to UK in 2017, and I tell you what, if somebody had told me around that time, I was kind of going to experience the same, but in a larger scale, I would have been very shocked and surprised. And particularly in terms of how he approached on a global level, because going back a bit, when Ebola was actually happening in West Africa, or, you know, in the Mano River Union, we call it the three countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, it did go to, you know, some cases did get out to places like Nigeria and other, you know, sort of European countries, but there was a procedure in place. And it's kind of different because when you have Ebola, you can see Ebola, you know what the symptoms are, you know how quickly it can, you know, it can take over. But the difference with this disease is the fact that according to the science, you can see it, you can be asymptomatic where you can be carrying it, but without knowing it. And the pace at which it took over the world, that is put the world on lockdown. Why did I just give this bit of a recap? Because of course I share platforms with Julie and social media networks. And somebody just posted on the thread, which says a global approach is needed to combat this battle, because the reason being, there's no point in, for example, closing your house, so to speak, but leaving the back door open. What happens is you more than likely would have somebody walking in, whatever the case may be. So you have to have that global approach, or we have to have that global approach to be able to defeat this disease. Now, one of the difficulties we faced when we went to Sierra Leone, and Julie touched on that on a conversation, was that this would actually be a lesson in the sense that it shows us now in particular how small the world is, or how technology has made the world just on our hands, so to speak, because now we're able to know what's happening in Spain, Italy. Touch wood, it doesn't happen on my head. Out of all West African countries, for now, Sierra Leone has not got any case of the coronavirus disease, which kind of puzzles me, because I'm thinking, well, oh, hold on, people have gone through that much of a problem, but then now we're faced with this. There's a lockdown that's going on, even without us having that. That global approach is key. But also working with people in terms of different cultures, in terms of traditions, in terms of religion comes into the play now. Because, for example, you have Muslim way of burying their dead. When we went to Sierra Leone, there's a culture there where the families mostly bury their dead. And due to lack of education there, the people just thought, oh, somebody's died in the family. The worst part of it all, why the disease got spread so much, was because when people wash the dead, you can imagine the water then gets into them, whole families wiped out, and it was a mess. The approach here in terms of what is going on at the moment worries me slightly, because the disease itself is showing that it's spreading very quickly and it doesn't take time to spread. The contact tracing that is going on, which would mean that if somebody has the disease, say around my area in, Manchester or Stockport, for example, everybody who I have been in contact with should be contact traced. That seems to be a slow process at the moment, because it's only when people say get the symptoms, they fall really ill, they're taken into the hospital. So technically, whatever figures the Department of Health is providing to us could not necessarily be the case. That worries me, the length of time. 2 or 3 weeks back, I think Julie would remember in the forum, I said it would have been better to close. I'd rather suffer for 3 months and get the job done than something that's going to last for a year. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm not an expert in the science, that type of thing. It's looking at the numbers to make sure. You have to go and find the disease. Where's the disease at? Where's the epicenter? You've got places like London, you've got places is it here in Bamako or something like that in Italy, and so on and so forth. We have to go and find the disease, not just anticipate that the disease should spread or immune to it, because you don't know. I could not be immune to it. Anybody cannot be immune to it. So I just thought I'll come and have this chat with you.
Can I just say something? Because I think there is an issue that we should all be thinking about, which is that poorer countries are going to suffer even more than we are going to suffer. And what I said earlier about our reawakening our spirit of generosity and openness to the world, we've got to do that in terms of our European neighbours, because I kind of sense that Brexit was very much about, it was when I talked about that the referendum campaign just being about what can we get.
Yeah.
In a way, what we've got to do is to reawaken that spirit of what can we give, how can we work together, and we've got to do that at a global level. And so I particularly think that it's really key for some education about what it means to be a global citizen. And for us to really understand about the input. And I'm so proud that I represented Manchester in the Northwest for 5.5 years in the European Parliament. And I often told people that there were more foreign languages spoken on the streets of Manchester than in any other city of the world except Chicago. And that
Wow.
tells you something about our British towns and cities, that we are already the world. We are already the world. What we need to do is join up the dots in our education system, both our formal education system and our informal education system, to make sure that when people are learning at school, they're learning this broader, they're having this broader education about sustainability, this wider education about our historic responsibilities because of our, the awful things that we did as the British Empire. And you and I have spoken about this a lot in terms of the slave trade. So let's just think about young people in this context, because this is a conversation for young, about young Fabians. So what would be really practical and a really great thing to do would be, I'm also a member of, I mean, I'm not a member of Young Fabians, but I'm a member of Fabian Women and the Fabian International Group and Fabians. But we could really be linking up with the Labour campaign for international development. There is a Labour society, and let's try and make those strong links between LICID, we call it LICID, and I already know that certain Labour members in that campaign group, they are so worried about those poorest countries in South America, in Africa, in Asia, where this virus, this pandemic will be absolutely devastating. It's going to be, we know that it's devastating, we know the tragedy, but it's always harder on the poorest communities and on those really, really overpopulated areas where there's massive poverty and inequality. So I think there's a role to play here for young Fabians who are international. I know they're international in that outlook, to be making that link with international development, because we could see the Tories, slash the international aid budget, because the populists will be saying, oh, why are we giving money, to this or that country for this or that, when we ourselves
are suffering in this situation?
Have a massive problem here. So let's reawaken that sense of responsibility. I took your points a little bit further, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Hollie?
Yeah, brilliant. Adam's just messaged me individually. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm really interested. It's a good discussion so far. I'm keen to understand a bit more about, in a post-COVID, post-Brexit Britain, we probably can be sure that the was going to be pushed back, and we won't understand what the new normal is for a little while. But I just wanted to find out from you a few tips and hints for people looking to stay engaged in Europe, and try and how can we mobilise with our young European comrades to make sure that we stay connected.
Right, well, there's loads of really fantastic networks that we can still be part of, because they're not necessarily networks that are just for EU member states, and some of those networks are not even run by EU agencies, even though they might receive some funding from them. So there's the European Youth Forum, which is a kind of a standing conference, if you like, for young people. And in fact, our brilliant Labour MP for Brighton, Lloyd Russell Moyle, was the president, I think, of the European Youth Forum for some time. And that forum, we need to make sure that we are connected up with that forum, that we've got representatives there, that we're feeding information in both directions. There's also every 2 years the European Youth Event, which brings together more than 10,000 young people to the European Parliament's building in Strasbourg. Now, it was supposed to be at the end of May, and I was going to be there as a speaker. Hunter from the Young Fabians was also going to be there, and I was going to be doing a session with Michel Barnier, actually. So obviously that's been cancelled because of the current pandemic. Hopefully it will happen later in the year when it's safe. But that European youth event, again, is not just for EU member states. I was one of the MEPs that was always there. Young people take over the whole of the Parliament. They take over the plenary sessions, the committee rooms, they take over the press room, they take over the Parliament's television station, everything. They also spill right out into the spaces outside the Parliament with live bands and music and all kinds of workshop and street food and sports and culture activities, lots of brilliant sessions about a whole wide range of things that young people really care about. But what's so striking about that gathering is that there are young people there from non-EU countries. So, for example, I met people from Georgia, from Iceland, from Norway, from Switzerland, and also young people from further afield. And that is an amazing opportunity for us to still be connected, if you like, with the work of the institutions, but along with all these other young people, you know, who are reaching out to all young people, regardless of whether or not they're EU, they belong to an EU member state. So, that European Youth event, it's a European Parliament event, but it works very, very closely with the European Youth Forum. There are other really amazing opportunities as well. There's I've been really involved in internet governance, which is a bit of a geeky thing. I'm useless with gadgets, but actually what I learned was how important the governance is. Like, who's running the internet and how transparent is it, and who's got the power to switch it on and off, and who's charging for it, and who's watching us, and where's all our data going, you know, all those kinds of questions. And so I became one of the MEPs from the Culture and Education Committee who was regularly sent in a delegation to the Internet Governance Forum, which is a multi-stakeholder event. So has politicians there, but also geeks and human rights organizations and platforms and coders and campaigns, you know, you name it, everybody who's using the internet in one way or another is there. But I got super involved with IGF Youth, and the Internet Governance Forum is a 2-week kind of shebang that happens, but the IGF Youth is 24/7, 365 days a year, and young people all around the world, and particularly in developing countries and less developed countries in the global south countries, those people were doing the most interesting things with IGF Youth. And once again, there's an opportunity for our young people to get involved in that amazing network. I think perhaps what we should do is publish some kind of article. I can give links and links for that. Now, when I was traveling all around the world on my various missions for my committees, or because I was speaking at a conference for an important campaign that I cared about, I would always contact IGF Youth and ask them, do you have a group in the country I'm going to? So I have met IGF Youth organizations in Nepal, in Haiti, in Pakistan, I think, in Ukraine. There's an amazing group in Liberia, for example, and these young people are doing extraordinary things. And IGF Youth as an organisation, it has its base in Paris at the minute, but I've managed to make sure that it's really embedded within the European institutions. I got it a place at the table with the European Internet Forum, which is a kind of lobbying, forum for people who work in the internet. So I was kind of there to be a bit of a thorn in the side of all the big platforms. I wanted to make sure that civil society was there. And so IGF Youth are involved in the European Internet Forum, and that gives them political lobbying power within the institutions. And I really think that we should encourage our young people to get involved in that, particularly because we're now doing even more things on the internet because of the pandemic. So this is a great opportunity, to set up some IGF youth projects here in the UK that could be linking with partners both in EU countries and further afield. They're just community. So, for example, for LGBT young people, there are networks like ILGA Europe and ILGA Youth. So for young disabled people, there are all kinds of amazing opportunities and networks. So I was doing a lot of advocacy work with the European Network for Independent Living, for example. They're campaigning for integrated inclusive education, for example, to make sure that people, that wonderful slogan, nothing about us without us, which, is a very powerful phrase, particularly for young people with multiple care needs. So I know that within that sphere, within different spheres of communities of interest, there are all kinds of fora and forums where young people can come together. There's brilliant stuff going on around young women and gender equality as well. And there are lots of opportunities for different training projects, different kind of experiences within the Parliament. So, for example, we always had this gender equality school in the Parliament, and the people who came on that were not just EU member state youth. So we would have lots of young people from the Balkans coming, lots of young people from Ukraine coming. And I think, if we are going to be a third country, if that's what's going to be happening to us, then we need to also make those demands on the institutions as well. I think we've got lots to offer. We've still got lots to learn. And it's so important that young people maintain these connections. So, so I think let's just continue to try and be in all those spaces, on all those forums, and be pushing. What will make the real difference is for us to be pushing our young people to, if there's ever places on councils, to be representatives, to have delegations, we need to fight for that. We need to say, we want our young people to be participating in these activities, whether or not they're in real time as flesh meetings, or whether or not they're online projects.
Right.
Brilliant, thank you, Julie. I've got a question now from Bethany.
Oh, I got full named. That feels so strange.
Your name is Bethany on here. If you've got a nickname, you need to put it on.
Oh gosh, that's my mum. It's okay. First of all, thank you to everyone for speaking tonight. It's nice to feel connected and part of something. I'm quarantined in my partner's house with his conservative parents, so I really appreciate this right now. Take away slightly from the international. I'm very sorry, and kind of poke at your cultural experience, if that's okay. I'm in my last year at the Conservatoire in Birmingham, although from Warrington, so thank you to your service for the Northwest. I'm actually doing some stuff with Spirit 2012 at the moment, so I've been in touch with Jack Drums doing some stuff on their carers funds.
Oh wow, that's my old organisation. That's amazing, Bethany. Wonderful.
They've been great, really interesting to work with. But obviously, being in my last year of drama school means we've got no acting showcase, sadly, which is the whole point of being
Yeah.
My question is really, how do we safeguard the arts and freelancers during this virus and Brexit, but also prevent it from being an industry just for the elite who can afford to have all their freelance work cut, who will be okay? And thinking about that, not just in terms of access and of class, but also disability. My area of work is SEN drama stuff, and I'm seeing all the SEN kids go home, and I'm thinking, well, what's this going to be like for you? We make sure that the industry is accessible to everyone, particularly during times of crisis and when leaving a big funding pot that is the EU.
Yeah, well, this is absolutely core to my whole life has been spent working in culture, and using the arts as a tool for transformation. And for me, neither process nor product was more important than the other. They were all equally important. I think that people in this crisis are discovering the power of the arts and entertainment and creativity. They're discovering how important it is. I talked a little bit earlier, I don't know if you heard when I said I'm listening to BBC Radio 6 all the time, and I'm so grateful for all those amazing musicians, who are still pumping out music, lots of them doing live concerts and streaming. I'm also very aware that lots of theatres, people are finding ways to do that online. And in fact, my own organisation that I used to work with is working out how it can support very vulnerable young people, even though we are social distancing. Well, we're not going to social distance, we're social, it's geographic distancing, isn't it? I just want to challenge that language a little bit, because social distancing, I think, is a bit of an off-putting phrase, and I think we need to try and change that round a little bit. So geographical distancing is what we need, rather than social distancing. We've got to keep close socially. I think that the people will understand how important culture and arts is, and that means we've got to ensure that people are, that the industries can survive. And the fight will be to make it more than the elite organizations, as you said, okay? So the large organizations that are called national portfolio organisations with the Arts Council, they will be safeguarded. That just rely on project funding, it's going to be much tougher for them. They won't be a priority at Arts Council level. We're going to have to really lobby hard to make sure that they continue to be able to function, because it's often those smaller organisations that are making the difference with the most vulnerable people. And have created the safe spaces and places that those vulnerable people have been using. And in fact, there's an economic argument here. You see, I know that the organisation I ran for 30 years saved the government money. I knew that through the work we were doing, the people coming to our organisation were not such a burden on the society. So, they weren't needing to access, they weren't getting into so much trouble with the police, for example, so then they wouldn't be going to court, yeah? There wouldn't be so much antisocial behaviour, for example, so they weren't taking up police time. People suffering from mental health problems, maybe not feeling good about themselves, through social prescribing. So we could really score a lot of points here on the social prescribing model. So the government's coming to believe in social prescribing. So that is where people suffering from anxiety or mental health problems, instead of getting a course of drugs, for example, or constantly going to the doctor, would be given, for example, free courses in dance or music or poetry or filmmaking. You know, it doesn't have to be arts, it could be sport, it could be doing stuff in the countryside, it could be working with animals or whatever. But I know that there's been an all-party political group in Westminster that's been working on social prescribing. Okay, now we have to embed all that learning. They've done all the research, they know it works. We have to make the case that this will save the government money, it saves our society money. So we can't, what we have to do is to make sure that the artists who are running those activities are people like you, yeah? So you're trained in, you know, you've been at the conservatoire, you're trained in your practice, but you have all this additional training as well, which gives you the skills to work with those really vulnerable people. And it's that combination of skills, I think, that make the difference. I don't think that anything's going to be easy when we emerge from this, but I do think that as a society, we hopefully will have relearnt a lot of fundamental values about, you know, I think we knew the price of everything and the value of nothing, didn't we? And maybe what we will be able to learn is the value of things. And you can't put a price on well-being. You can't put a price on happiness anymore, you know, and these are things that we know that arts gives to people. Now, access to culture is also a right. And children also have a right to play. And we're going to have to we're going to have to talk about a lot of rights-based access to things more and more. I tell you, I have been really heartened by the fact that the Creative Industries Federation, which has often seemed to be an organisation for the more commercial, large organisations, has in this crisis reached out to a whole range of organisations that it never worked with before. It's giving 6 months free membership to ordinary freelancers, to, you know, social enterprises, to small arts organisations that never previously would have thought about being a member of the Creative Industries Federation. And I think that tells you something about the big players, that they also understand that the freelancers are an important part of the arts ecology. So that's also very interesting in what's happening at the moment. And my final point about all this is, let's get unionized, yeah? We've got to have trade unions. You know, some friends of mine set up the artists' union, and I was so proud of them for doing that. That's for artists, you know, fine artists. But we've got to have, and Dr. Stephen Pritchard, who's also a great friend and a contact of mine, he's already said, look, you know, this sector is really struggling now to make itself heard because it didn't have that collective voice at the point where we needed it. You know, the musicians' union's been very, very strong, but that broader group of freelancers often working cross art form, you know, working in, you know, trained as artists of various kinds, but working in the community. It's like, where was your trade union? You know, I ended up joining Unite because I couldn't find the right trade union for what I was doing, and Unite hasn't been perfect for, you know, for me as a trade union. So I think the time is right for some really powerful trade unions activity for the sector to stand up for it, and, you know, to make that case in the way that the Artists Union has been operational. we've got to stand up for all workers, haven't we? And we've got to make sure that the people in the gig economy and not working in what's seen as statutory frontline services are just as valued for what we give to society. And certainly we're going to need a lot of healing, a lot of social, a lot of that real important social connection that we know the arts gives to people. So it's never, from my perspective, been the icing on the cake that we can get rid of. It's been absolutely fundamental to the foundation of a decent society that we need to all have arts activities within easy reach, accessible, either free or very, very affordable. Let's make sure that we can do that. And I just wanted to say, from the point of view of conservatoires, I learned something very, very interesting about conservatoires, actually, that they're vocational educational organisations. And I hadn't realised that conservatoires aren't considered. They're considered within this broad range of vocational training institutions. And I think, again, we have to say that this is about people doing jobs, because I think the government also gets vocational, doesn't it? It kind of understands about that. So let's make that case stronger for people training in the arts.
Thank you.
So, does anyone have any final comments, thoughts, questions? Okay, then we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Julie, for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone else. I do, what Julie said, I think it's really important, with especially everything that's going on, to see faces, to have discussions, talk about things other than our impending doom, etc. So thank you very much, and all of you take care, stay safe.
And you, thank you, Hollie. Okay, see you all soon. Okay, cheers.